Hello and welcome to Beveragecast. Now, I'm gonna start the stream off with my typical spiel for a streamer, which is thank you all for being here. You being here does a whole lot to support the show and keep the show on the road. Good. Financial support is never necessary and always appreciated, and there's a couple ways you can do that. If you scroll on down into my profile, there's a funny little button that says donations. You can click that to give me money. Now, never mandatory, always appreciated. But some of the best ways that you can support are just by being here, spreading the word. I don't have an advertising budget or anything like this. This is a one-man show. So spreading by word of mouth means a whole lot. And you can also support me by being active in chat. I see we've got a lot of enthusiasm in chat today. Thank you, guys. So yes, being active on chat, following me on Twitter, at DOSRG Art, and I will type that out. That there is my my Twitter account, which you can follow to hear all about my streams and hear about my thoughts on things. I tweet about beverages quite a bit. Now, without further ado, we can actually start the show. So, tea, huh? It's one of my personal favorite beverages, and it's an incredibly diverse group of beverages, and it's very versatile in how it can be prepared. There are easily thousands of ways to prepare it throughout the world. It has a truly fascinating origin story with a number of myths associated with it, and I'm really excited to share it all with you guys today. And just before we start, I want to share what beverages I'm drinking down here in the studio. I have a strawberry soda, and that's what I'm drinking today. And I also have water, which is not a beverage, but very important for a streamer. If you don't have water, your throat will die. Now then, the first thing I want to discuss is the origin story of tea. There are two myths, really, associated with the origin of tea, both of which involve the Chinese emperor. So one story I first heard when I was in, I think, middle school, in a social studies class, which is that a servant came to serve the emperor tea that had been boiled to make it safe to drink, when some tea leaves fell from a nearby plant into the water. The servant was frightened of retribution, and so he claimed that the known benefits of the tea leaf were infused into the warm water. Now, lucky for him, the emperor absolutely loved the beverage, and he requested that it be made and served regularly. And that's one of the mythical origins of tea. Now, of course, we don't know anything about the truth of these stories. There aren't records of this, but this is a common story that you'll hear. Now, the other story focuses, it's a bit more mythical in nature than the first one that I told you. The story goes that the emperor was poisoned with something like 26 different poisons, and fearing death, he ate the leaves of the tea tree. Miraculously, he very quickly felt revived, and thus he began to spread the word of the tea tree and its benefits. And both of these are very interesting stories. I think many of which, well, I'm not sure if people have heard these frequently or not. These are definitely both stories I've heard, but it took some research for me to find them. So that's the very beginning of what I wanted to talk about today, just the mythical origins. And like I said before, we can't really verify these stories in any way, and in fact, they do have quite a mythological nature to them. So it's very likely that these are not true events, but they're still very interesting in terms of stories of how it spread, don't you think? Now, as for the known history of tea, I do want to go over that, and that's going to be a bit of an extensive part of the podcast today. Is the history of tea and its spread throughout the world. So if you didn't know, tea plants are native to the Assam region of India and the Sichuan and Yunnan provinces of China. Of course, these are the modern names for these areas. They were known by different names in the time period. And there's evidence of tea being drank, or actually not drank, but being consumed as early as Neolithic periods. So originally, tea was not brewed with hot water or with dried leaves the way it is today. Originally, tea leaves were often chewed to have the benefits of caffeine, or they were eaten as part of a sort of salad, or they were mixed into warm porridge. Drinking it as a brewed beverage actually didn't occur until much later in its history. But, hearing about this, it actually makes me really curious what tea tastes like fresh off the plant. I've never had it like that before. I'd be very interested in making porridge with tea, or I suppose with tea leaves. It certainly sounds interesting. So, the spread of tea very likely followed the spread of Buddhism throughout the world in Asia. Asia specifically, really, is where the origins of tea start. Because Buddhist monks were known to enjoy it quite frequently, as it was an excellent source of energy and fuel while doing long meditations. So if you didn't know, Buddhism originates in northern India and Nepal, and in the 6th century, started to spread throughout the rest of Asia. Specifically, it spread into China, then into Korea, then into Japan. And tea pretty much followed this path. It's likely that tea was spread to Korea and Japan by Buddhist monks who had returned from studying in India and in China later on. Brought back as something they learned about while they were studying. So tea in this era actually likely doesn't resemble much what it resembles nowadays. It was quite bitter, quite medicinal. It wasn't entirely pleasant, and really it was something that was drank for the sake of, I suppose, sustenance and for its health benefits rather than its flavor. But in the Tang Dynasty of China, there were advancements in technology that made brewing much more precise, so that you weren't as likely to overbrew and create that bitter substance. Anyone who drinks tea regularly is probably familiar that when you overbrew tea, or if you brew it with water that's too hot, it can get quite bitter and unpleasant. But in this era, there became more advancements in how people are brewing and how precisely they can boil their water. That makes it a much more pleasant experience to drink. So, these technological advances are part of what helped tea spread throughout China. With its more pleasant taste, it became a cultural fixture in China, with the advent of tea rooms, cafes, and serving tea becoming extremely common in social events. In fact, it became so common that it was almost, I suppose, not unheard of to not serve tea at a social event, but it was certainly not incredibly common to lack tea. Apologies, I took a break to drink. So, tea actually spread in popularity throughout social classes, but it was the lower social classes who ended up cultivating it. The Chinese emperor actually ended up demanding it to be grown as tribute to him. And this was actually quite a grueling process, and it was not very ethical to do so, considering the intense physical labor associated with cultivating tea, alongside the already intense labor associated with rice farming, which was quite common in this era as well, and is still common to this day. But it was because of this that tea began to be viewed as something quite valuable and quite important, and that's what allowed it to start being part of trade routes and spread throughout Asia. So while it was very bad that the emperor forced people into cultivating tea. Without this labor, tea wouldn't have evolved in the way that we know it today. So, the way we sell tea today is loose leaf, correct? Most commonly you'll see it in bags or in loose leaf, yes. But at the time of the advent of trade routes, it was actually sold in a very different form. It was sold in compressed bricks of tea leaves. And the way you would prepare it is by scraping or cutting a portion of tea off of this brick, and then brewing it in the hot water. This made it much easier to transport, and it also helped preserve tea for long travels. And this is what allowed it to travel along the Tea Horse Road and the Silk Road. Ryan says, bites a chunk out of your tea brick. Good luck with that. They were quite compressed, and I imagine you would not get an incredibly pleasant taste out of that. So, some of the first places that tea spread was to Tibet. Tibet is north of India, if you weren't aware. And it took on quite a unique quality. Tibetan people developed a method of tea that involved combining milk, milk, butter, salt, and tea into a beverage that consisted mainly of fat. And this really helped, because at the time in Tibet, and even now today, it was a very frigid land, and very hostile to plant life. Thus, introducing plant life into their diet through tea became very important to the Tibetan people's health. And we'll talk more about this very unique tea culture that developed there later on. So I mentioned that the spread of tea occurred mostly along trade routes. You're probably most familiar with the Silk Road. And this is a very major route that tea spread along, spreading from East Asia and northern India into places as far away as Siberia. And even from into Central Asia and the Middle East. This is how tea traveled. But a trade route you're likely not super familiar with is the Tea Horse Road, which is, as the name suggests, an incredibly prominent trade route where tea is traded upon. Or along, I suppose. My throat's very dry today, especially because my voice is currently changing, so I apologize that I have to take such frequent breaks to drink. And if you were wondering about these tea bricks, they were common until about 2750 BC. And prior to this point, brick tea was the most common form you would get tea in, and in fact, there are still some teas that are sold in this form, which we'll also discuss later. Also, you might be thinking of black tea as that's the much more commonly drank in the West, but at this point in time, black tea hadn't even been really, not conceptualized, but not invented yet. And it didn't become common until the 16th century. So along this Tea Horse Road, it travels mainly in China and India, but it also spreads into Korea. And this is spread from Korea into China, spread from China into Korea, and then Korea into Japan, where it was mainly adopted by samurai. Samurai are responsible for a lot of the introduction of tea culture into Japan. I think a lot of people have this view of samurais as being pure warriors, but actually there are quite a few traditions that originate in their practices. Tea being amongst them. In fact, we can trace the origins of tea ceremonies in Japan all the way to samurai. Samurai were known for having tea parties and communal social events where tea would be served along with food and snacks. And this spread all the way to the shogun. And if you weren't aware, the shogun is the military leader of Japan that was prominent intermittently, essentially trading power back and forth with the emperor of Japan. Uh, and this shogun, the shogun, is really responsible for a lot of the solidification of tea culture in Japan. It's said that at one point, the shogun was so hungover that he himself was believed to be on the verge of death, and everyone around him believed this too. It was said that a Buddhist monk, having returned from studying in China, presented him with a bowl of brewed tea, and this soothed his hangover so well that he became a passionate tea lover and began both importing tea wherever he went, bringing tea with him, serving tea at all his events, and eventually leading to him promoting the spread of tea throughout Japan. This is really quite an interesting origin story, wouldn't you agree? I feel like many people would never associate the samurai with tea, but it turns out this is in fact very much the origin. Now, it's not entirely agreed upon into how tea got introduced into Europe. In fact, it's more that it might be a multifaceted introduction. For example, it may have spread from the Middle East into Europe while trading occurred. It may have also spread from Siberia into Europe. Siberia and the Russian area, and that large section of land. And it was also said that Dutch traders may have imported it after their well-known trade deals with Japan. So in reality, there were many, 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 many factors that led to the spread of tea throughout the world. And it would probably be impossible for me to summarize this in a timely manner, but the basics of it we just went over. Tea came from northern India and China, spread to East Asia and Central Asia, spread into the Middle East from there, and then likely spread into Europe via trade. But what you're likely most aware of is the cultural hold tea has in the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. I believe most people would associate tea with the British, but in fact, it's actually the Irish who drink more tea, on average. So really, any opportunity to dunk on the British I will take. The British don't really entirely deserve their reputation as tea lovers, I believe. Clearly, they're not as dedicated to it as they like to present themselves. Now, the spread of tea into Europe preceded a number of very significant historical events you've likely heard of before. Something you've likely learned about are the Opium Wars. There were two of them, and they were in the first Opium War between China and England. What you likely didn't know about was why the opium became involved at all. So originally, when England began importing tea, they would trade silver for tea traded in the brick form. But eventually they found that this was too expensive and began demanding that Chinese traders accept opium in return instead. And this led to a public health crisis in China as many became addicted to opium and became ill because of their addiction. China very quickly expressed displeasure with this and began protesting and taking action against British control, and this was really the spark of the Opium Wars. And of course, there was a second Opium War. There was a second Opium War as well, but this one had a little less to do with tea and more to do with China rebelling against England's control over their trading and population. Now, another historical event that you likely already know about, especially if you're American like I am, is the Boston Tea Party, which is not a pleasant or civil event the way you might associate the name with. This is quite a tongue-in-cheek name. It involved American separatists dumping just millions of, or I suppose not millions, but thousands of bricks of tea into the Boston Harbor as a rebellion against British rule, and as a symbolic victory against the British loyalists, who were really fighting for the United States to be part of England rather than a sovereign nation. So tea has played a number of roles throughout history and really influenced a lot of historical events in ways you might not have expected. Now, a fun fact about the Boston Tea Party: many imagine them as dumping loose leaf tea or even bagged tea into the harbor, but in fact it was actually in this brick form that we already mentioned. There are really so many tea-related events, and if anyone in chat wants to bring up any that they're familiar with that we didn't cover, please do so. We'll visit those. We might even do some on-air research. So now that we've talked about the history a bit, did a quick summary, I'm gonna take a drink real quick. And now, we can discuss some of the properties of tea. So, tea is a plant, obviously, as we previously mentioned, native to the Assam region of India and the Sichuan and Yunnan provinces of China. It's a tree, and it also produces tea tree oil, which is known for its benefits in, like, antibacterial benefits. In fact, you can apply it to your skin, yes, you can apply it to your skin or your hair to help soothe things like conditions like eczema or psoriasis. So it has a number of benefits in that section, or in that sense. But when it comes to consuming tea, the leaves are definitely more preferable than the oil. You probably shouldn't consume tea tree oil. It's generally considered bad for the consumption. But tea is associated with a number of health benefits. Various forms are associated with different benefits, but in brief, tea contains a number of vitamins and antioxidants, and it also contains caffeine, which, when consumed in moderation, can have quite a number of health benefits. Studies have even shown that tea and regular consumption of tea, in moderation, of course, not just chugging constantly, but having a couple cups of tea in a day, or drinking a cup of tea in the morning, can have even limited anti-cancer benefits. But ultimately, its most significant benefit is just in its hydration. Some people will tell you that tea is dehydrating, but this is actually not correct. It's true that caffeine is a mild diuretic, but typically not enough to counteract any benefits of hydration. Tea really is a majority water, so it's a myth that it can dehydrate you. Ultimately, tea is a very tasty way to stay hydrated, which I know many people aren't very fond of drinking straight up water, so tea is a great alternative to that if you're that type of person. And I mentioned before that there are various types of tea, most of which come from a single tea plant, which I will look up the scientific name of now. I neglected to think of that before, but the most common type of tea plant is Camellia sinensis, which is a species of evergreen. Now, the teas that are made from this are black tea, white tea, green tea, and oolong tea. You might ask what the difference is if these all come from the same plant, and the answer is the level of oxidation. Black tea is the most oxidated. White tea is semi-oxygenated, and so is oolong tea. And green tea is unoxygenated. As for the difference between white tea and oolong tea, I'm not entirely certain, and not many sources could tell me what the answer is, but I do know that they certainly taste different. Presumably, the difference is likely in the preparation or aging of the tea leaves. One of the most interesting varieties of tea, in my opinion, is pu'er tea, and I'll type that out so you can look it up for yourself. Pu'er tea. This is an aged tea, which has been, fermented. Now, something that's unique about pu'er tea and the way it's sold and traded nowadays is that it's in the brick form. As you know, we mentioned that the brick form fell out of favor in about the 17th century, but pu'er tea has actually maintained this form throughout its history. It's frequently aged in caves as well, which is quite interesting. I have found that it has a very earthy taste, almost fermented, which makes sense as it is a fermented tea, I suppose. It's incredibly unique in its flavor profile, and honestly, it's hard to describe in words. I'd really recommend if you have the opportunity to try it yourself. Perhaps you can go to a local tea store. Yes, cave tea. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, it's just so interesting, all the different ways they'll prepare and make teas. It may even, on occasion, involve fungus. I'm not entirely certain how common it is, but in my local tea shops I've certainly seen pu'er tea mixed with mushrooms to make a very unique tea. Not hallucinogenic, of course. They can't just sell that to you in a store. Maybe one day, I suppose. Who knows what science will do next? Now, the final category of tea is something that tends to inspire some pedantic arguments, and that's herbal teas. Some will say that herbal teas don't include tea leaves and therefore aren't tea. However, I think that this is petty, pedantic, and honestly splitting hairs. In the common nomenclature, these are referred to as teas, and so I will do the same. This category is incredibly diverse, and it can include some classics such as rooibos tea, which I'm told originates in South Africa, lavender tea, a personal favorite, mint tea, fruit teas like peach or cherry, and many, many more. At the time of recording, we're actually in strawberry season, so if you want, I would highly recommend this being the time of year where you would go out and seek fruit tea such as strawberry tea. It might sound odd, but it's really quite pleasant. Now I'd like to take a moment to ask the chat, what's your favorite kind of tea? And while I wait for responses from that, I'm going to do a little more research on pu'er tea on air. Orion My Ryan says that their favorite type of tea is sweet black tea. That's quite an excellent choice. Okay. Now, here's something I didn't realize. Pu'er tea is native to the Yunnan province of China, which means it originates all the way from the origin of tea. Isn't that fascinating? And it's produced quite traditionally, and is a local delicacy, really, in the Yunnan province. Now, we're going to get to the part that I've been most excited about at this point, which are types of preparation of tea throughout the world. And while I discuss this, please feel free to continue listing your favorite teas in the chat. I'll visit them while I speak, no worries. So, of course, the most basic preparation seen throughout the world, which can be done with the vast majority of teas, is simply adding leaves into a hot water. This can be done either by adding the tea into the hot water or adding the hot water onto the tea. Both are equally effective, but some will argue as to which is the proper method. This can be done with the vast majority of tea types, with very few exceptions. And it's probably the most common preparation throughout the world. Now, in many places, it's also common to stir in milk and sugar to enhance, or I suppose mask, if you don't happen to like the flavor. Throughout Europe and the world, it's common to start your day with a mug of tea made to your liking, and in some areas, it's almost expected that every person will have a unique preference for how they prepare their tea. Now, if you're curious about how I prepare my tea, most commonly, I like to produce a strong black tea, served hot, and then I stir in a splash of cream and a small amount of sweetener. If anybody in chat would like to share how they like to prepare their mug of tea now, I encourage you to do so. Now, in line of this stirring in of milk and sugar, I'll discuss milk tea. Now, milk tea is exactly what it sounds like. It's tea mixed with milk. Many cultures add milk or dairy into tea. You're most likely to see the terminology milk tea associated with East and Southeast Asian preparations. It's typically very sweetened, and it may be sold prepackaged, either in cans or in bottles, or you may get it in a cup, which has been sealed with plastic over the top. This is most common in Asia, specifically East and Southeast Asia, and it's very popular. Now, another variant of this that you might be familiar with is boba tea, which features tapioca pearls added in to prepared tea. Oh, Ryan mentions sun tea. I make sun tea. Have a big old jug full of water and decaf tea bags, and I leave it out in the summer. Then I add sugar. That's so pleasant. I didn't even mention sun tea in this. I should have. Thank you for bringing that up. I myself also make sun tea. I like to take fruit teas specifically because I find that they work best in the brewing in the sunlight. It takes quite a bit longer than it would to just pour hot water over, but I find that it tends to be much smoother and milder than tea brewed with hot water. It's incredibly pleasant, and I really greatly enjoy the process of making sun tea. In fact, when it gets warmer this summer, I think I will make myself sun tea. Maybe I'll make a white tea, sun tea, which is quite pleasant. Now, I trailed off in the middle of explaining boba tea. So, boba tea is a variation on milk tea which features tapioca pearls added in to a prepared milk tea. Now, it doesn't have to be milk tea, but that's probably the most common addition you'll see, or the most common thing you'll see added in. But while tapioca pearls are the most traditional, there have been a number of innovations and inventions and inclusions. Nowadays, you'll often see fruit-flavored gummies added in, or you'll even see popping jellies, which are filled with juice, or sort of jellified liquid. In my area, it's not super easy to get boba tea, but it's something I'm very fond of. Typically, I'll get just a standard black or oolong tea with tapioca pearls, but I know many people who will go as far as to have such like a fruit juice with popping fruit jellies, which is quite unique. Not technically tea, but it's very interesting to see how the practice has evolved over time. Now, I mentioned that most tea is prepared by pouring hot water over leaves, but there's one exception that you may or may not be familiar with, though it's become quite popular and trendy lately, and that's matcha tea. Now, it's unclear where matcha originates, but it's likely that it originated in China, but it became most popular in Japan. It's mixed directly into water without the need for hot water or brewing, and most traditionally, it'll be mixed using bamboo utensils. This is the type of tea featured in tea ceremonies, but it's also become incredibly popular as a flavoring in treats such as mochi, cookies, lattes, served hot, served as a milk tea, or in any number of things. And while it can take a bit of adjusting to get used to the matcha flavor, I find that once you're adjusted to its rich, grassy flavor, it'll quickly become your favorite, I think. It's also known for its vibrant green color. If you look at a matcha tree, it's almost impossible for it to not be bright green. And I really appreciate this incredible coloration to it. Now, one of my personal favorites types of tea preparations is masala chai, which is common throughout India as well as in surrounding cultures and nations. This is a black tea brewed in hot milk with a number of spices added. Typically, it can include cinnamon and clove and any number of other other aromatics. It's incredibly rich and incredibly filling, and it's drank daily throughout the world. In some places, it's so common that you can get a portion for just a few cents. So its milk base makes it very creamy and smooth, and its warmth and aromatic spices make it quite satisfying and filling. It's truly a delight. I've had the opportunity to drink it as it's prepared in India, but if you don't have this opportunity, I'd really recommend you seek it out in any way that you can. But you'll also see it as part of lattes nowadays, which is very unique and pleasant. Now, in another dairy-based tea, here's one that I've been really excited to share about that I learned about recently in the course of researching for this episode. This is po cha, or butter tea. We mentioned previously how Tibet developed its unique tea culture after trading with China to receive this. Now it's actually made with pu'er tea, the unique fermented tea, and it is known for its distinctive use of yak butter. Now there are two styles of preparing po cha. The first is to boil pu'er leaves for half a day until it's incredibly dark, and then skim it and shake it in a container with yak butter and salt. The other method is to brew the leaves until the tea is dark black, and pour it into a butter churn with a lump of yak butter. Either method is pretty well equally accepted, and once they're completed, you can pour them into a copper pot to keep warm on a brazier, or into jars. I'm told this is an incredibly unique experience that you should definitely try if you have the opportunity. And it has the texture of a very thick soup or an oil. This is a truly unique method that I really haven't seen in other places of the world. I'd really love to try po cha one day. Now, the final method of tea that I wrote down is the Mongolian salty tea. I'm about to butcher the pronunciation, but I believe in Mongolian it's referred to as sutesai. It's made using water, milk, tea leaves, and salt. Now, to many of us, salt and tea might be unfamiliar, but in Mongolia this is incredibly popular, with many people drinking as many as 10 cups a day. Though I imagine that's a bit of an extreme appreciation for it. Now, the most traditional preparation involves first boiling the water to make it safe, brewing the leaves, then adding in the milk, and then adding in salt. Apparently, traditionally, there's a system of scooping and pouring as you stir in the milk and salt with a ladle, but many, for the sake of convenience, will omit this step and just simply stir it in, like with a spoon. For many foreigners, this is an incredibly unfamiliar experience, but throughout Mongolia it's incredibly beloved, and it's really considered a local delicacy. Now, as I mentioned with pu'er tea, this is one of the few types of tea that's still made using tea from a brick. Many times this brick comes from lower quality teas that were not traded elsewhere, but it can also be made with really any variation of pu'er tea, as far as I'm aware. You know, with modern convenience, this tea is even available as an instant packet, something that, since I don't have the opportunity to try freshly made, I might actually try and pick up. That concludes all the write-up that I've done. It's funny, I wrote about 4 times as much as I did for episode 1, and yet it still took about the same amount of time to read through. So at this portion, I'd like to open up the floor to the audience to ask questions about tea, or to talk about their experiences with tea, to ask any questions about the history that I might not have gone through in my write-up. Or if you'd just like to discuss tea in general, I ask that audience participation begin now. Now, something I think I almost neglected to mention is that tea is one of the most popular beverages in the world, so it seems incredibly likely to me that people will at least be familiar with it and have tried it at least once. In fact, in terms of beverages, it's considered to be the most commonly drunk, although it trades and competes with that spot with coffee. Now, in terms of drinks in general, it's likely the second most popular after water. Now, of course, water is not a beverage, as I have established many, many times. So it's really quite interesting to me just how much tea has cemented its place in society. Almost nowhere, almost everywhere has its own distinct preparation of tea. I'd like to know. We've already mentioned Orion. My Ryan has mentioned that they prepare sun tea, but if anyone else has a unique preparation, I'd really, really enjoy hearing about it. As you know, audience participation fuels quite a bit of the show. So I really appreciate any commentary that people have. Now, we did mention sun tea, which is something I actually didn't research, but something that I've done extensive research on in the past. So I do want to mention some of the safety precautions involved with sun tea. Because of the nature of it, it's prone to bacterial growth, but there are some very easy ways that you can prevent this. Now, any container you use should likely be glass or plastic. And you should make sure to clean it thoroughly before making your tea. You should also make sure to pre-boil any water and let it cool to kill any bacteria that might be inside. You should also make sure that it's sealed tightly so that you can prevent any contamination from anything outside. Now, if you're especially worried or paranoid, you can also make sun tea in your refrigerator, but it'll likely take much longer and it probably won't be quite as vibrant. As long as you take proper precautions, you should be fine. Let's see. If your sun tea has any string-type material, then you should avoid drinking it. But for the most part, sun tea is a very fun project to do. You can include fresh herbs in it, or you could even make your own tea. If anyone has any experience growing their own tea plants, I'd really love to hear that. I see we got a few new viewers, so I just wanted to mention that we're in the audience participation portion of the podcast. If you'd like, you can discuss how you like your tea. You can ask any questions about the history of tea. You can make any commentary or criticize anything you heard in my podcast that you disagreed with. Any and all audience participation is welcome. Well, I understand that I was really quite thorough today, so I'm not incredibly surprised that there aren't a lot of questions or commentary. But I'd like to thank everyone for being here. We're likely going to go until the end of this hour, at which point I'll be ending the podcast, but I want to thank everyone for being here. And thank you all for enjoying my silly little podcast about beverages. You learned many things. Thank you for the knowledge. Yes, of course. You know, if you would be interested, I would be open to sharing a copy of the notes that go into my podcasts. A little bit of a behind the scenes peek. Maybe I should actually make a chat command. Would people be interested in that? Being able to type something in to get a copy of my notes? You think that would be really cool? Well, I'll definitely look into setting that up. Thank you all for being here. I hope you learned a lot about tea. I actually don't particularly want to drag the podcast out super long. So I'd really like to thank everyone for being here. My voice is a bit tired, especially because it's changes. Sort of like a bibliography of sources. Yes, of course. My voice is currently changing, so it really is very easy for me to wear it out. So I know this is a very short stream, but I'd really like to thank everyone for being here. Your support means a lot. Beveragecast is a passion project that I've dreamed about doing for many years, so the fact that people are here and enjoying it is just an incredible honor. People supporting this silly concept in general makes me very emotional. And the best thing you can do for me is to just be here and view my streams. So, thank you all so much for being here. It means a whole lot. You guys keep the show on the road and inspire me to keep doing this. Actually, one thing I'd like to mention is my plans for next month's episodes. I've pretty firmly established that this is going to be a monthly thing. At least that's the current plan. So, people who are interested in hearing more Beveragecast, you should follow me on social media at DOSRG Art on Twitter to get announcements for the next episode, which will be on soda. We'll be discussing the history of soda, its wild origins, and we'll be discussing some of the important historical and cultural events involving soda. So I hope everyone looks forward to that. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. And, as per usual, I'll repeat my spiel on how you can support the show. Following supports me a whole lot. Being active in chat is really meaningful. Listening live and following means a lot, and watching the VODs on YouTube does too. Of course, I have the financial support method that you can do by donating, which is never mandatory but always appreciated. But really, it means the most if you spread my streams by word of mouth. Tell your friends who you think you would like it. Tell them about this funny Tetris guy who discusses beverages. It all means a lot. Thank you all for being here today. And, goodbye. I know it was a bit of a short stream, but thank you all for being here. I'm gonna see if there's anyone to raid, actually. Who's live right now? Anyone good? No, I don't see anyone particularly interesting to raid right now. Well, in that case, thank you all for being here. This is goodbye for now, and I'll see you all next week. Remember, I stream at Saturdays on noon EST. Goodbye. Thank you all for being here.